name is Sam Mkokeli. I am an independent journalist. Independent in the sense that I am associated with the Sunday Times, Business Day, where I write columns, and the Financial Mail, and not independent in the sense that I am not with the independent group yet. It's an internal joke, Commissioner. Welcome to this great event. We couldn't have found a better place in South Africa today to host the event where we unpack the budget, 2022-2023 budget. Partners better than Deloitte, who need no introduction in South Africa, and the work they do. It's a wonderful event. We've got both hands, the left, the right, the hand that takes money away from you, and the money that comes through the other hand from the National Treasury. We couldn't have found better people to unpack this at the very difficult time in South Africa, also probably at the best of times where there's money coming through the so-called windfall. Thanks for joining us online and physically here at Deloitte, where we unpack the budget. I will try and do as quickly as possible because there are better speakers than I am. We've got the wonderful Director General at the National Treasury. We've got the SARS Commissioner lining up to talk to us, and a wonderful panel led by a great journalist and really wonderful South African, Nikiwe Bikicha. But before we do that, I'm going to hand over to the CEO-elect at Deloitte, Ruwaida Redfern.
Director General of the National Treasury, Mr. Dando Mokhajani. Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, Mr. Edward Kieswetter. Our esteemed panelists, Dr. Sitambile Mbeti and Dr. Tabi Lioka, and our panel moderator, Nikiwe Bikicha. Members of the Deloitte Africa Board who are present, and members of the Deloitte Africa Executive present, our valued clients, leaders of South African business, members of media, Deloitte Africa staff in attendance, and of course, all of our virtual guests, good morning and welcome. Thank you for making time to be with us this morning for what we hope will be a robust, engaging, and insightful dialogue. After almost 2 years of hard lockdown restrictions, it feels surreal to be able to gather in person, even in restricted numbers, while of course maintaining the virtual presence that has become very much a part of our lives. The personal interaction really makes us feel alive again. So we are gathered here today to have a dialogue and a deep reflection of the national budget that was unveiled just over a week ago. This was a very positive budget speech for Minister Dogondwana, and our view at Deloitte is that it is a balanced budget for trying times, to use the minister's words. We commend government's commitment to the reconstruction and recovery of our economy, to saving lives and restoring livelihoods, as well as securing the long-term prosperity of South Africa. At Deloitte, we believe that business has a purpose beyond profit and should play an essential role in improving society, including advancing economic opportunities and promoting fair business practices. We also believe that while being profitable is an important indicator for the state of our business, it is by no means the only goal. And our philosophy is therefore purpose beyond profit. We recognize that our long-term sustainability and that of our clients is linked to the health of the societies in which we operate. The past 2 years have served as a reminder that we need healthy societies from which to draw future clients and employees. And part of our purpose beyond profit philosophy is to initiate or lead a range of such important conversations as the one that we are having here this morning. So ultimately, we seek to make an impact that matters on our people, our clients, and the communities in which we live. We recognize that the budget is central to all three of these stakeholders, and hosting a critical conversation about it helps them make better decisions about their lives and futures. And this is the impact that we make. So we hope to influence such dialogues as the one here today to help shape the economic and social policy for the benefit of society. We are therefore honored to have leading us in this conversation the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, Mr. Edward Kieswetter, and the Director General of the National Treasury, Mr. Dondo Mokhajani. Thank you both once again for making the time to share your perspectives with us. Ladies and gentlemen, optimal collection of revenue is critical to the functioning of any modern economy. And this year, the institution that collects revenue for us, the South African Revenue Services, celebrates its 25th anniversary. For this budget, SARS collected 1.5 trillion rand, which is 182 billion rand more than projected at this time last year. This outcome is said to be due to the high commodity prices over the past 2 years. But what this assertion overlooks is the work that still has to be put in to actually collect the revenue, to close loopholes and leakages in tax collection, and make the process efficient for both individual and corporate taxpayers. And at SARS, that work takes place under the stewardship of Mr. Edward Kieswetter. Mr. Kieswetter, congratulations on SARS' silver anniversary, and thank you for your tireless work and leadership. It does not go unnoticed. Ladies and gentlemen, I now hand you over to Mr. Edward Kieswetter to give us his address.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you to the Deloitte leadership for hosting us and for creating the opportunity for myself and my partner in crime, the DG of Treasury. I'll explain to you now how we are partners, to address you and share with you what we believe are useful insights to understand what the Minister of Finance and Government is trying to do. I've recently begun to use the analogy that if South Africa were a company, then the President would be its CEO, the Minister of Finance would be the CFO, the Director General would be the Finance Director, managing the Treasury, borrowing to make up revenue shortfalls, and the Commissioner of SARS would be the Sales Director. The products we sell would be tax products, priced at a particular rate. And the question we ask ourselves, because we understand that the integral component or the integral contribution of the role of SARS to the fiscal integrity of South Africa is simply this. The more efficient SARS is in administering or selling its products, the better our sales or our revenue will be, and it takes pressure off the finance director to go to the market and get expensive money to fund the program of government. Because we all know, those of us who have been in business, that it is important to understand that your cheapest money is from your sales, your own money. And so the question we ask ourselves is, how do we increase sales? Well, you can do that in two ways. The easy way is to hike prices, right? And we know if we hike prices, you risk losing market share. You risk losing clients. And so while it's the easy way, and sometimes you have to adjust for certain things, it's the last resort. Your better way is to increase market share. And that's the role we play. The market share indicator for SARS is its compliance index. And we can tell you that we do not have 100% market share. Our market share at the moment is closer to 65%. which means we can do a better job as a sales department for government. So what do we need to do to improve the revenue for government? What do we have to do to improve sales to capture more market share? We have to do two things very well. The first is we have to build a capable administration, people who are professional, who are technically competent, and who can behave beyond reproach. And secondly, employ data and technology in a fast evolving world where the volumes of data, the millions of taxpayers that we have to serve cannot be done only by shuffling paper and capturing data. And so that's the work of rebuilding SARS, and while we do that, we have to build public confidence. Because while we don't have a direct competitor in this market, we compete against the share of wallet. And we know that people who are struggling, they would serve their short-term, immediate needs and sometimes compromise their tax obligation. So what has happened in this market of ours? Well, in the last year, we know that GDP has nominally increased by just over 12%, when the final numbers are eventually printed, in an inflation environment that contributed about 5.9%. We know that employment on our register has dropped from 14.7 to 14.3 million people, but wages have increased by 6%. Some of that wage increase is once off, where there's a retrenchment payout. Bonus payments are variable. Increase to the wage bill is permanent. That goes into the base. We also know that household consumption is up 10.9%, exports up 23, just over 23%, import up over 21%. We also know that in the economy, and I point this out because very often the commodity price impact, in our view, is overstated. So from where we sit, we see that, yes, the commodity cycle did make a significant contribution towards the better revenue performance. Our estimate it is probably around 50 billion, but that the rest of the economy also showed an uplift. The year-on-year increase in manufacturing is 30%. The year-on-year increase in the wholesale and retail sector is 23%. The year-on-year increase in the logistics and communications sector is 22%. And so we have benefited from the entire economy uplifting and probably providing somewhere between 60 and 70 billion extra revenue. That's what happened in the market. What happened in our client base? We've added just short of another 1.47 million taxpayers. Not all of them are new. Some of them registered for another tax. Some of them were delinquent and were restored. So 1.47. What has that done to sales? It's added 3.6 billion rand. Just the work of expanding our register. What actions have we done? Well, first of all, there isn't a straight line correlation between what happens in the market and what happens in sales. We have to harvest that. Let me give you one example. There's something in our law called paragraph 19.3. Paragraph 19.3 has been introduced because very often businesses are conservative in the estimate of profit when they pay their provisional payments. And then SARS has to look at it, compare it, look at the law, and make an adjustment in terms of paragraph 19.3. By just doing that, we have added almost 12 billion, which would have come, but maybe next year. We have the benefit of that, and therefore it has a huge impact on the time value of money, and therefore the borrowing cost. What else have we done? Well, not all customers pay on time. They have to be reminded. So we have a growing debt book, an unwieldy growing debt book. This year, to date, we've had to work through and resolve 2.4 million instances, cases of debt. Not all of that were friendly. We've had to appoint a few sheriffs. We've had to issue 5,500 civil judgments, appoint just over 300,000 third-party collection agencies, issue 24,000 letters of demand. Those are administrative actions, which if not done, would mean that revenue stays out of the fiscus. And the longer, those of you know, there's an inverse correlation between the age of debt and its collectability. And so taking action soon is very important for ensuring that revenue comes into the fiscus. That body of work has year-to-date produced 47 billion rand. Then we have the sad, I'll give you one more example, but I can share many more examples with you. We have an unfortunate state where we just don't have low compliance level because of negligence and ignorance. We have low compliance because we have members in our community, in our client base, in our public, who deliberately seek to defraud us. Let me give you two examples. This year, we have processed almost 3.5 million VAT returns. We anger some taxpayers because of certain capacity constraints, we don't always complete it within our 21 days. It irks us more than you, I promise you. The abuse I have to take on Twitter speaks to that. But 3.5 million VAT returns, when we look at that, it has credit returns of 2.6 billion rand. If we had to do nothing, we would pay out 266 billion rand to taxpayers. But because we have built a risk fraud detection capability using data, using artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms, as well as the application of human effort, we were able to detect 30 billion of the 266 billion as would have been fraudulent. And so in the number the minister announced, there is 30 billion rand of fraudulent VAT refunds which would not have been there if SARS did not do its work. We service year to date 5.3 million individual taxpayers, people that we think would all be honest. Sadly not. We have seen the abuse in terms of home office claims during this pandemic era. Right? And I've had to disallow many incorrect or even criminal requests for allowable deductions. The value of the 5.3 million returns amounts to about 30 billion of credit claims. Again, if we do nothing, 30 billion would flow out. Because we do verification and compliance checks, ask for additional data, disallow certain incomes, certain expenses, discover certain incomes that were not disclosed, we raise additional revenue, and in this year, we prevented an outflow of almost 8 billion of fraudulent or impermissible refunds, which would not have been in the fiscus. And so if we add all of these, as Bill Gates says, if you have $1 million here, $1 million there, soon you'll have money. And if you add our collective effort this year to date, we can share with you that we have ensured an additional 144 billion of money in the fiscus that would not have been there if you didn't have the sales department of SARS functioning well. We have a long way to go. We are far from perfect. We would be the first to tell you that the rebuilding of SARS, particularly following the state capture era, we have probably not even reached halfway mark. We can also tell the Minister of Finance and the Finance Director there is still a lot of money out there. We are far from 100% market share. Invest in SARS to build our capability, because this is the best way to improve our fiscal integrity. And then, of course, we leave it up to the sales director to decide how he guides the allocation of money, and then we hope that some of that money produces productive capacity, new jobs, because that increases our share of, not our share of market, our base into which we can capture market share. So that's our story. Hopefully that helps you understand what we do when we're not posting tweets on Twitter. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Commissioner, for your insights. We thoroughly enjoyed your analogy. And it is very positive to hear about the digitization journey that the SARS has been on and how that is bearing fruits. Thank you very much for that. And we are looking forward to further engagement during the panel discussion. Now, please allow me to introduce our next speaker. The Commissioner described him as the Finance Director. And it is really the person whose work and leadership is central to compiling this budget, the Director General of National Treasury, Mr. Dando Mogajani. one of the most stable institutions of the democratic South Africa. So one of the most stable institutions of the democratic South Africa has been the National Treasury, which has proven to be an epitome of stable leadership with good internal succession. From its first DG, Maria Ramos, the department is probably the only one that has succeeded to appoint all of its DGs internally. Mr. Mokhajani was the latest in a series of these internal appointments when he took up his post officially in June 2017. Now, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana was recently asked what he plans to do when the DG's contract expires in June this year, and the minister emphatically stated he is going nowhere, having served Treasury for 23 years after joining in 1999 as Deputy Director General. In that period, he has worked in various roles, including, among others, the Intergovernmental Relations, Provincial Budget Analysis, and the International Economic Relations Divisions. He has also been the Deputy Director General responsible for the Public Finances Division. Director General, as Deloitte, we are heartened by government's ability to allocate 17.5 billion rand new funding for catalytic infrastructure and 76 billion rand for job creation programs over the medium term. We are heartened too by the 20 billion rand set aside for the bounce back of small, medium, micro enterprises, a crucial component of our growth and job creation efforts. And lastly, we are heartened by government's ability to maintain a social safety network for the most vulnerable, whilst constantly reminding ourselves that as long as we do not create sufficient jobs, we will have a significant number of people relying on grants. The one aspect of the budget that should have us all worried, the one that should give us all, as executives, business, and political leaders, sleepless nights, is the minister's assertion that over the next 3 years, South Africa's growth will average less than 2%, around the 1.8% mark. We know that this is inadequate to address our country's challenges or to meet all of our population's needs. All of us as social partners, be it business, government, labor, and communities, should be seized with finding ways of changing this trajectory and improving our economic growth path. And I hope that today's discussion will shed some light on how, as different role players in the economy, we can play our part working together with government. We are honored to have the Director General here today to share the insights of what it took to get what was recently presented by the Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Dondo Mokhajani.
Thank you very much, Rowena, and thanks for Lwazi. He just helped me sort myself out. The problem with this finance director is that he doesn't have a finance qualification. You know? He's not an accountant, so we that's the issue. I wouldn't want to say that, but ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity. Thanks to Deloitte for inviting us. We've been partnering with Deloitte for a number of years in this post-budget engagements, and special thanks to Delia. She's been wonderful in arranging this, and many of the colleagues that I have asked that they come and engage with Deloitte in this, just rose up there, took the occasion, and then they ran with it. And then they are just as good as you can imagine. And this exposure really gave them a good platform, and thanks very much to Deloitte and to senior many members of the Deloitte family. Thank you very much. And also to the sales director, Mr. Commissioner Kisvetter, thank you for the money, for 182 billion. And I was going to correct Rueda, because it is not only through efforts, or through commodity prices, but also a chunk of it, as you heard the commissioners, because of the hard work that the colleagues at SARS are doing, and thanks to them, they're doing a really good job, and all we have to do, as the commissioner says, is to support them and is to make sure that SARS becomes the institution that we all can be proud of, because we were proud of that institution before, and those days have to come back, and we have to have a good SARS, a good tax collector, and that we should all be proud of. Now, in terms of today's deliberations, I would like to make a few comments as to what exactly was going on in our minds. I mean, Roeda and Loazi and Delia and I had dinner, and they didn't know that that conversation that we had before the budget, that I was sizing up things from them. They thought, anyway, they paid. I had hoped their credit cards, and I was going to bounce so that I pay for them and demonstrate to them that we have 182 billion. But I couldn't say that. I had to tell them. But what I said that night to them, I said, look, where we are at as a country, we are in a very difficult space, and it's going to be a very difficult environment moving forward. There are many things hanging in the air, and I left it at that. But the things that were hanging in the air, we had to balance them. And this budget that we presented was about that balance that's needed. To make sure that business is happy, to make sure that the vulnerable and the poor are happy, to make sure that we build infrastructure investments, we put, as Edward says, put more resources into productive sectors of the economy. We had to do all of that, whilst at the same time, making sure that we are able to take a little bit of the 182 and pay that towards that. And it was difficult. So that balance was quite difficult to do. And as you know, the demands, that came very late, by the way. And you would have imagined that during the medium-term budget policy statement, we did not, at the time, indicate that we'll be extending the social relief of distress. So the 44 billion number did not exist. It only, as we understood through the, Revenue Analysis Working Committee and the work that they do there between SARS, ourselves, and the Reserve Bank, in trying to understand where the estimates are going to be, we had to model our thinking around what's possible. So we're able to put that money aside to address, money for the poor. This budget is putting 59.4% of consolidated spending towards social wage. It's not, if you look at many budgets in emerging economies like ours, you would not find that. But so it's important that we see this budget as doing exactly that, continue to address poverty and unemployment and to support economic recovery. So again, there are many criticisms out there that we could have done better, we could have done more. The reality is that already we are spending about 59.4% of this budget in social spending. We, as I said, we're also talking about restoring public finances. Debt to GDP hitting the roof. I mean, 80% debt to GDP is something that we should be worried about for the size of the economy that South Africa is. And we've been saying, if you remember, for the past 10 years, as debt was increasing, at some point, I remember back in 2011 or so, we're saying it must stabilize at 40%. It must stabilize at 50%. And it's been stabilizing. Even now, we keep on saying, we hope it will stabilize at around the 70s and not increase to more than 80%. But it is doing that because on the side, we have to really make sure that the economy grows. We really have to make sure that SARS becomes what it is to collect more in order for us to reduce our borrowing. It's not easy when you look at a budget and you are presiding over a budget that's spending 303 billion rand on debt service cost. When your budget for health, consolidated budget for health is 280, consolidated budget for peace and security is about 220 billion. I mean, it's unsustainable the way it is, and it's something that we should continue worrying about in making sure that the money that's available for us to spend, we spend in the right areas. On the tax side, as I said, it was about balancing. You should be happy. Corporate should be happy. 1% goes a long way, again, we're able to make sure that we keep our promise. One of the most important things that I've learned, Nick was calling me Mr. 23 years. I mean, come on, 23 years is a long time, and at some point, you grow old and tired. So, yeah, let's leave it at that. But the reality is that in the 23 years, Nikki, what I've learned is that the integrity of the budget is what, you know. And when we introduced the medium-term budget policy statement, I think we introduced it in 99, September. We actually did it in November that day, if I remember. Initially it was not part of a legislative framework. It was just, what Trevor Manuel did at the time was just to give an indication what's going to happen in February. And because other countries were doing it out there, and until we perfected it. But what we say in the budget, and what we say in any speech or in any MTBPS, the market, and you obviously will have to keep us, checked. And so we wanted to keep our promise. Minister Mboweni, former Minister of Finance, gave a signal about a 1% possible reduction in CIT. We did that, but we obviously did that for good reasons, and we think we'll have to obviously see the benefits moving forward. We need to do more. We need to do more to accelerate growth. We need to, do what we said we wanted to do. You'll remember in 2017, we came up with some things called 14 confidence boosting measures. If you go to the MTBPS of 2017, the most difficult ever, by the way. I always say, every year, we always say, this is the most difficult budget. But 2017, October, MTBPS, it was difficult because that's the one that led to us increasing VAT by 1%. That's the one that, in January of that year. But we came up with some things called 14 confidence boosting measures. What were those? I mean, it's the same things that we are talking about today, which are structural reform program and what the economic reconstruction recovery plan says. What are the things that we have to do? We've been talking about them. So again, we know where we should be going. This budget says there are some of these reforms that we need to accelerate and implementation and make sure that Operation Vulindlela functions. So for us, I think this budget was also, reminding ourselves within government, and sometimes remember the role that we play in treasury. And Ed, I don't know anything about 19.3, I don't know. I can only talk section 213. If you're talking numbers, I can only say 213 says. Now, if I'm not wrong, I think 213 established the National Treasury, the Constitution now, and it gives us certain responsibilities. And again, what we do and the importance of the kind of role we played over the years is to really be an irritant in the system that we operate within. We have chosen to be that, but we didn't remove ourselves from government, and we've never even attempted to do that. But the Constitution gives us certain responsibilities that we become that sounding board to the whole of the state, and so that the integrity of the state is kept intact. So in this budget, we said, hey, government, and remember we are government, there are these things that you said you should do. Let's do them. And we set up Operation Vulindlela again to really be an irritant in the system to push. But if you've worked in government, you know how complex it is. And governments are not called bureaucracy for nothing. They are bureaucracies. They are complicated. But look, the reality of our situation is that there's more that we need to do. There's more introspection that we need to make. There are many own goals that we've scored in the past. And again, this budget was saying to all ourselves, as South Africans, as partners, stakeholders in the government system, to say, let's identify the own goals and let's deal with them. And one serious own goal is the non-implementation of these structural reforms that are critical and that we need to do. What is this budget also doing is about strengthening the fight against corruption. And the resources that you saw we giving to the NPA, the resources we're giving to SARS, the resources we're giving to peace and security, we're simply saying enough is enough. There's a Nugent report, there's a state capture part 1, part 2, part 3 and a half. We all have them now. All of them are pointing to the wrongs that were committed in the past. And I think putting money aside and making resources available to fight corruption is going to be quite critical. And also, as the Commissioner says, it's important that we beef up resources to SARS towards ensuring that they have to do what they have to do from a tax collection point of view, including where criminality exists, that it must be detected and be dealt as such. Now, and it's important as we move forward that we do exactly that. We said we will, for instance, in the next few days, make sure that the focus on the public procurement bill, currently not many tenderpreneurs or people who do business with the state, let's call them properly, because tenderpreneurs doesn't exist. People who are not happy with us because we have just stopped tenders. But we didn't just stop them because we like stopping them, but we are, and we cannot behave like we are a failed state. The Constitutional Court has made certain rulings, and we have to respond to those. We have to respect the rulings, and we have to act. And whilst actually we're fixing ourselves and fixing our processes, fixing of things that are not very clear. So we did that because we are fixing things. We will obviously, in the next day or two, be filing with the court for the court to be more clear in terms of what the ruling is all about, and also we'll be coming out with some further detailed and further communication to explain later this afternoon on what we should, how this procurement regime should be like, as we fixing what the court says we are out of line. So I just thought I must mention that so that we lay this to bed, because out there's a belief that we have paralyzed the state. The intention is not that, but the intention is to make sure that the court processes and court rulings are adhered to. We have also in this budget finally says infrastructure remain key, putting money in productive sectors of the economy remain key. And as I think, Roweda gave some small numbers, but there are much bigger numbers in terms of what this budget is. I mean, 800 plus billion over the 3 years towards infrastructure investments is money that's there. It's money that has to, the private sector must come to the party with. We have in this budget also in the Division of Revenue tried to make it easy for the private sector to partner with government in ensuring that at least social infrastructure is delivered in the most efficient and effective way. I mean, coming into the Deloitte building, I kept on asking Loazi, this building is something. Maybe we must just swap, come to 40 Church Square. It's an old Reserve Bank building, Paul Kruger. There's some Paul Kruger, gold is still in the basement. We'll open, you'll own the gold, but give us this building. But it tells us that there's opportunities that are there in ensuring that not only buildings like these, but the infrastructure that we see around, here. When I became DG, the very first ever public speech that I gave was on a Saturday morning, the day I was, but the first Saturday after being announced, there was a Abasa, was it Abasa or Absi, one of those, they asked me to come and speak. And I said, guys, it's important that, and at the day I said, why can't Alexander 10 and become like Waterfall and the precinct around here? Why do we keep on ensuring that the apartheid city mentality is but it all talks to infrastructure. The apartheid city mentality has to actually change in the way government views infrastructure investment, so that something that was not there, it used to be a bushveld many, many years ago in this area, at least towards, and those who have you've been Joburg for a while, that it used to be the DBSA and those 2 petrol stations only 20 years ago. But look at it now. But it all talks to that partnering, and all that you see is private sector investments that I think this budget also was firming up and saying, let's engage, let's partner so that we are able to leverage on the resources that we've put as a state in order for us to ensure that South Africa becomes a country that we can all be proud of. But thank you very much, and thank you again, Lwazi and colleagues at Deloitte, for the opportunity that you gave me and Treasury to interact with you this morning. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, DG. I saw in one of the newspapers recently a very beautiful line that nothing matters in politics, and all these beautiful statements don't matter unless and until they are in the budget. So I thought of that line, DG, when Roweda shared the story about the minister speaking beautifully about your future. saying the DG is not going anywhere. And I wished for you there was a way to put that in the budget. As we go through that budget, we can find that line and hold him accountable. Thank you so much, Director General. And hold on to your questions, because there's still a lot to happen. The next panel is ready, and the DG is on stage. The commissioner comes back on stage, and good political analyst and economist, they both are joining us for the next panel. So there will be an opportunity for the audience on the live chats to send their questions and interact with the audience. And I would imagine they're very exciting questions for the two gentlemen. And sadly, in that cluster, we see a lot of gentlemen and not enough women. And that is the state of affairs. And I say this as well in very good company at Deloitte. It's a wonderful thing that Deloitte has done. And with Lwazi Bam retiring, and we're seeing a very beautiful, good South African leading this organization. It's a wonderful thing. And I do hope that our friends in government will take note of that as they think about the future and being a representative of the South Africa we wish for. It's time for a quick break, 2-minute break. We'll be back. Don't go away. Thank you.
Loving you is easy 'cause you're beautiful. Making love with you is all I wanna do. La 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 la. Didn't mean I did do. No one else can make me feel the colors that you bring. Stay with me while we grow old, and we will live each day in springtime. Loving you has made my life so beautiful, and every day of my life is filled with loving you. Loving you, I see your soul come shining through, and every time that we have, I'm more in love with you. La 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la la la. Didn't mean I did do, no one else can make me feel the colors that you bring. Stay with me while we grow old, and we will live each day in springtime. Loving you is easy 'cause you're beautiful, and every day of my life is filled with loving you. Loving you, I see your soul come shining through, and every time that we have, I'm more in love with you. Loving you. La 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la la. Didn't mean I did do, indeed I thought loving you. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. You'd be like heaven to touch. I wanna hold you so much. At long last, love has arrived, and I thank God I'm alive. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. I love you, baby, and if it's quite alright, I need you, baby, to warm a lonely night. I love you, baby. Trust in me when I say. Pardon the way that I stare. There's nothing else to compare. The sight of you leaves me weak. There are no words left to speak. But if you feel like I feel, please let me know that it's real. You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. I love you, baby, and if it's quite alright, I need you, baby, to warm a lonely night. I love you, baby. Trust in me when I say. I love you, baby, and if it's quite alright, I need you, baby, to warm a lonely night. I love you, baby. Trust in me when I say.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll start in 30 seconds. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome back to the Deloitte Post-Budget Analysis event. I'm delighted to be your host and moderator for this portion of the event. My name is Nikiwe Bikicha. I wear a great many hats, but for the purposes of today, I'm the moderator of this particular panel discussion. We're so delighted and honored to have had the Director General of the National Treasury, Dondo Mohojana, as well as the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, Edward Kieswetter, detailing for us in some granularity some of the thinking that went into what has been described as a very delicate and tough balancing act that went into last week's budget, on the back, of course, of the higher than expected revenue collection for this particular year. We're going to unpack that with them now. We've heard their views, we've heard some of their thoughts. We'll try and get more details out of that, but we're also joined to help us unpack all of that by a very formidable team of analysts. Dr. Tabi Lioga is a very well-known economist and commentator here in South Africa, and she joins us on the panel. Also have the pleasure of Dr. Esteemed Mbete, herself a very well-known and accomplished commentator, political commentator. She is a senior lecturer at the University of Pretoria, currently on sabbatical, and is the program director of Future Elect. We have already welcomed the DG and the SARS Commissioner. So Tabi and Stembile, a very warm welcome to you.
Thanks for having us.
And because we've already heard from the Director General and the Commissioner, let's get almost your immediate response to some of what they've highlighted this morning. Tabi, I'll start with you. You've already produced a great body of work on the budget already. In your weekly column, you said that it was a very balanced budget in a very polarized society, but the difficult decisions were made. In looking and trying to understand the trade-offs which have been made, do they speak to the needs that the country has at the moment?
Thanks, Nikiwe. I think, absolutely. The country is currently very, very polarized. The needs are many. If you look at the unemployment numbers, if you look at the increase in poverty, if you look at the impact of COVID on the South African economy, we're really in a very difficult position as a country. And so, the task for the National Treasury, for Dondo to steer the ship through all of these challenging, issues is very difficult. So I don't think that, I was surprised at how much they did with so little to start off with. And especially because they did it at a time that they were under a lot of pressure. As you may know, towards the end of last year, there was increasing pressure to allocate money towards social grants. And there was also a discussion about the basic income grant. And and also to increase the COVID grant. And many people out there were saying, not just 350, but actually increase it to about 850, increase it to over 1,000, and do it in perpetuity. Now, it's very difficult to do so when you have a country where your debt is about 70% of your total income as a country. And this is just for this year, and it's expected to increase further. It's very difficult to do so, to appease everyone when your debt servicing costs are about the third or fourth biggest line item in your expenditure for this year. But then in 2024, 2025 financial year, that is going to be the second biggest line item. So instead of allocating money towards economic development, health, defense, the only one that is actually above debt servicing costs is education. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult to allocate resources when
South Africa's debt in 2008, 2009 was just a little above Eskom's current debt. And right now it's 4 trillion, over 4 trillion rands. So when you say how do we make sure that everyone receives the right, or the allocation speaks to everyone, it's very difficult to do so. And I also think that we often forget that the National Treasury is not a creator of policy. It is a taker of policy. So they have to allocate resources to areas which have been, I don't want to say dictated, but where there's suggestion in which the government departments will say, look, this is what we want to do. And there's also a political pressure to say, look, this is what we want to do. So as much as we've been speaking about the budget being allocated towards more investment areas so that they could, the resources that we have could generate economic growth, and there could be a multiplier effect. We are continuously allocating a big chunk of our resources towards consumption. So what that does is that we're consuming our resources, very little resources, instead of actually allocating these resources to areas that can actually grow the economy, employ more people, shrink the inequality gap, shrink the poverty gap. The other one that I just want to mention is that there are lots of challenges. So as much as we talk about these limited resources, there's also pressure in terms of how, pressure from wages, public sector wages, that the public sector says we want a wage increase. Never mind that a lot of people in this room didn't get a wage increase, or bonuses were halted because of COVID. Yeah. And this can be said about a lot of people in South Africa. But we do get this, one of the fastest growing line item in the budget is also this wage increase. And I often joke, because recently there was this a march against the World Bank, because Dondo went to the World Bank and got a 1% loan. And the people who are marching are recipients of a salary that comes from lenders who are based in Europe and based in the US, and are making 8% returns from buying our debt. So there's a lot that is going on in this country, but to answer your question directly, it is very difficult to appease everyone, but I think they did a very fair job.
Yeah. Stebula, let's bring you in here. The budget obviously isn't just about the numbers. The numbers tell us a story about what's happening in society. Your assessment of last week's budget in terms of the policy directional signals and what it tells you about where we are as a country.
Thanks so much, Nigiwe. When I was a student at UCT and being taught international political economy, our lecturers always used to say, if you want to know a country's priorities, look at its budget. If you want to know an organization's priorities, look at its budget. And I think certainly what is evident from this budget is that there's been a prioritization of some of the important social sectors that we have as a country. So, prioritizing funding to education, to healthcare, to the police and to security, and then to those parts of the economy that are required for our economic recovery, so infrastructure, etc. I've been very happy to see that there's been so much of an emphasis placed in boosting law enforcement agencies, so putting money into the NPA, etc. However, I think that the bigger conversation that we have about the budget, and this is something that the two gentlemen sitting with us can't do directly, but I do think is something that we need to build public conversation and public pressure around, is that South Africa doesn't have a money problem. South Africa has an administration problem. Mr. Kieswetter spoke about capable administration as the first one of the first things that he has to be concerned about in doing the work that he does. And where all of the things that we see going wrong in a country, in our country, infrastructure money not being spent the way that it should be, our healthcare system, falling apart at the seams, despite the presence of really remarkable, committed healthcare workers in the system. The same with education. Is it the administration problem? And some of the things about the administration problem is really basic, that there's no one who knows where this paper that you filled in goes. And so you fill in a form at Home Affairs. Where does that paper go once you've filled in the form? Who empties the in-tray? Once the in-tray is emptied, where does that pack of documents go to? The problems that this country is facing are that basic. When the president spoke in his State of the Nation address about accelerating the provision of water permits, he spoke about the new appointment to deal with red tape for business. So much of that is that we don't have the right people in the right positions doing the right job. You hear business complain about environmental impact assessments. Those aren't inherently difficult things to do. But most of our provincial departments and national don't have people that know how to do those assessments. So it takes 3 years because there's no one, the people there don't know how to do it. And I think that we need a great deal more curiosity on the part of the presidency, the Treasury, who do remarkable work. Mr. Kisvete, in his department, in SARS, a big part of the work that you've done has been about restoring the capability of the bureaucracy to do what needs to be done for tax collection to take place. I just want to give one illustration of this. In October or November last year, Minister Ayanda Zozo of the Department of Public Service and Administration answered a parliamentary question from the Democratic Alliance about the amount of sick leave that had been taken by public employees. I don't know if any of you tried to use a deeds office or a Home Affairs since March 2020. Most of the time, there's no one there. And so when she answered that question, of the 1.3 million public servants in this country, 800,000 took sick leave, paid sick leave, between March 2020 and October 2021, at a cost of 14.3 billion rand to the fiscus. That's 70% of government employees, excluding defense and state security. What is going on? And how is that even possible? And so these questions of administration are things we need to get curious about if we want to have any hope in making sure that the money that has been so dutifully collected and has been so skillfully assigned actually does what it's supposed to do.
Absolutely. I sense your frustration. I imagine that it's a widespread sentiment in South Africa because we tend to go over the same issues, the same challenges, and yet in reality, and when it comes to tackle things and being decisive and implementing, very little gets done. Certainly that's been an admission from both the DG and the SARS Commissioner as well. DG, let's bring you in here. Tabi also flagged this in talking about the public sector wage bill. Since last week, where it was highlighted as a risk to the fiscal framework, there was good news from the Constitutional Court ruling in favor of government that that was, in fact, the right decision. It ruled in your favor. We're going into another round of negotiations at the moment. So firstly, your reaction to that Concord ruling and your sense, or is there a great deal of apprehension going into these negotiations?
No, thank you very much. I think good news in good inverted commas. I mean, you don't want to be singing praises and happy and say we have won or the plus minus 100 plus pages that I filed in January of 2020 or 2019, somewhere there, with the court when we said we cannot afford, we cannot say we won. It would be wrong to approach it like that but what we should rather be saying is that let's then finally there's space created for us to have a sober conversation around affordability, around state of our finances, and the choices that we need to make if you think about it. It's about choices. It's about saying to labor, let's sit and talk. If by any number, and in terms of what the analysts have said and what we also said, a state, an economy the size of South Africa, and vis-a-vis its percentage, its spending on wage bill, it's very high. And if you look at, every indicator, points to that. So it's important that we have a conversation with labor and say, how do we deploy productivity issues that, Stemble is talking about, let's bring them on in the conversation, and let's be honest with what we can do. And let's be honest with the performance of the sales director and what they are able to do, because the money that we generate can only be spent in a particular way, can only be spent based on certain thresholds that we think make sense. Unless if people are saying that we must just pay, increase salaries to a point where the size of the salary bill is much higher than what we're spending on public service delivery interventions. So put that aside now. It's not a victory for us, but it's mainly hearing another voice that's helping and assisting in putting some sober-mindedness in the conversation. The negotiations are starting. It makes sense. Firstly, I think I must state where we are at. We respect the Public Service Bargaining Council process. It's important. Collective bargaining is a pillar of our engagements as per our own history, because we've got a very rich history, the role of labor vis-a-vis the role of capital, vis-a-vis the role of the state. So collective bargaining is something that we respect, and we will continue respecting, including, by the way, the agreements that we sign. And the only difference, and people should not say government did not honor the last year. But what we said, and humbly so, if you read that affidavit very clearly, we're simply saying, let's relook. We have a challenge right now, but let's engage. So as we get into the new conversations around what kind of settlement should we reach, again, we will have to open up and say, we've got a challenge around balancing the spend on social programs, balancing the spend on what I said earlier around boosting productive sectors of the economy, for the sale direct, in terms of our conversation earlier, to collect more in order to make everyone happy, including labor. But again, we should be realistic in terms of inflation and the cost thereof, and what it means actually to keep people employed, and what it means actually to attract the best skills in the public service. And so it's again going to be a very interesting conversation that we'll have with labor, and we're going to go in there open-minded and obviously hoping that we'll find each other and this time around and respect whatever agreement that will be reached upon at the end with them.
Okay. Just another follow-up questions, and let's drill down into the GDP forecasts and estimations. Growth is going to be central. We've heard it from all of the speakers here. You spoke earlier, Dondo, about the structural reforms which South Africa needs. I mean, we've been talking about this ad nauseum, let's be frank, and I would like to understand from you whether it's Operation Vulindlela or any of the other initiatives which are meant to loosen these burdens. What can you give us as a tangible example which has actually been implemented in order to help us deal with these structural problems that we have?
Look, I mean, we should all be happy in the next, while, the spectrum will finally be released.
In the next while. Can we be more specific?
Next week, actually. Next week. So that's when I want to sing praises of Hallelujah and say, finally we got it. So it will be released. And the squabble that was there in various stakeholders, including ourselves, is not there. Say there's that certainty. And you all know what that means for actually the economy, how the potential that's there for this release to actually make sure that broadband and access and connectivity, all of that, and then we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see what industry is going to put up once this spectrum is actually released out there. So that's one. Don't underestimate the 10 megawatts vis-a-vis the 100 megawatts. That on its own That on its own really, made sure that industry is able to perform. That's one. The ease of doing business, I understand. I understand if you go to other countries, for you to set up a company, and it takes for you to get a tax number, for you to get the company registered, and a VAT number, everything. So in some cases, it takes 1 day, within 24 hours, within a few hours, you've got that. Now we have to work towards that, so that when Stembile goes to Home Affairs and goes to, you mentioned 2 areas, Home Affairs and Deeds Office, that there's somebody on the other side. So for me, those 2 things are just a clear example of things that finally will work. I mean, others, obviously, you can say, no, it's not. It's going to happen. Whether we rail network and how actually do we get, third-party operators coming in that space. And it's something that I think if we, work towards that, it will happen. And look, whether we like it or not, and I think private sector participation is crucial. It's crucial. The example, and I always use this example because it's worked. If you look at Telkom, it used to be owned by 100% owned by the state some 20, 30 years ago. It's productive, it's operational. Government owns, 35, whatever, less than 40%. Let's open up the economy. Let's open up more private sector participation in state-owned companies is going to be quite critical. Let's wait and see what SAA example will mean for future companies. And I think we must be open-minded again and not politicize that conversation, because it's important. And so long as we all understand that this state can be restored to its former glory, and it's possible, we can go there, back there.
Great. Just to remind our audience joining us online that we welcome your questions and your comments. Please use the facility that has been provided to do so. We'll try and put the questions to our panel a little later on as we go through our discussion. Commissioner, let's bring you in here. You spent some time going into the granularity of some of the efficiencies that you've had in revenue collection. It clearly hasn't been an easy journey for SARS, having been hollowed out as part of that whole state capture process. Take us through that journey and what enabled you to be catapulted into the position that you are now of these improvements and efficiencies.
Thank you. I first would like to just endorse what the lady in red and the lady in black, Tava and Sinabila, has shared. And I agree that we'll never have enough money to do what we need to do. All of us, by the way. That doesn't just apply to government. How much is enough money? Yeah. I don't know the answer to that question. But you have to use the money you have better. And we are not. We still have too much wastage, and we still have administrative inefficiencies before we even get to corruption. So there are a few things I think that would make an exponential improvement in the way government runs. Firstly, we take too long with policy formulation. We fight with ourselves. We're an us and them society. Within government, we have us and them, and between government and civil society, we have an us and them. We are a united society. And so it's within our DNA. So we have to address that as a nation if we want to go forward and work together. If you look at the analysis that was done by the NDP in their diagnostic, they said 2 things that have prevented us from succeeding. One of it is the capability to execute, and the other one is we don't have a strong socially cohesive society. And we still haven't addressed all of that. So that's the first issue. It just takes too long to do anything. The second is we do not have an environment within government that enables excellence. Our entire, and Dondo knows, and we are looking at that, our entire PFMA has become an instrument to ensure you get a clean audit rather than perform excellently. So, for example, we celebrate a clean audit, even though there's no service delivery. Because a clean audit has become the gold standard. Now, I'm the first to say that good governance is absolutely central. But we have become so obsessed with a clean audit that the easiest way to achieve a clean audit is to do nothing. Right? If you did that in business, you'd get fired. Sometimes in government we celebrate that. So as I'm coming to the question now, so the challenges we still have in SARS, we work in that very environment. To recruit anyone takes forever. The Auditor General comes into our organization and we have to spend inordinate amount of time to justify why I made an appointment. Time that could be better spent to rebuild an organization. To give you an example. I'll give you a nice anecdote that you can tell your grandkids one day. So we do a piece of translation work from French to English. With some inexplicable reason, our procurement team puts out a tender to translate, let me just say, 1,000 French words, right, into English. So the quote comes back on 1,000 words. It so happens that if you translate 1,000 French words into English, you get about 1,200 words. And so we proceed with the translation, and we get a finding. We get an audit finding. You can go and read it. It's in the papers we submitted, in our annual report. We get an audit finding for that. It would have been better to go out to 3 more tenders for another 200 words, because then we would avoid the finding and probably pay double for the overall piece of work, but we would have avoided a finding. So that's the second thing. Procurement doesn't work in government. It doesn't stop billions of rands of corrupt PPE procurement, but it hamstrings a CEO who just wants to run an effective business. So, and I can give more examples. The environment is not enabling excellence. And then thirdly, building capability to address those basic things just requires relentless effort. There is no easy way to build a solid administration business. You cannot compromise in anything. You have to hire the best people. And very often we don't get the best people. We have to trade off. But given all of that, a few things that is within our control. The first is to be clear. That's the choice we made. So 3 years ago, we said, 1, we believe state capture was real. No one must doubt where a leader stands on matters of principle. We said state capture was real. It was a result of a corrupt leadership. And if you are in denial about that, you're either ignorant or you're complicit. And if you're a SARS employee finding yourself in either of that, you are in trouble. We addressed certain individuals who compromised the integrity of SARS, and many of them have left. Some of them still lurk in the shadows because people don't come to them and say, listen, I was also corrupt. Continuously, just last week, 2 of our employees were arrested. And we'll continue to arrest and incarcerate employees who think they can collude with taxpayers. You have to be clear about that. Secondly, we have to be clear about our strategic intent. Today, our strategic intent is well documented. And I think it's a simple, clear story. Everyone can understand it. And then you have to organize to give effect to your strategic intent. And then you have to allocate resources to give effect to that. And so we still have some challenges in that. But I think notwithstanding, I think what we are beginning to prove is that very often it takes small factual changes. It's not one big thing. It's just persistent effort, doing small things, doing them right, over and over again, and you will turn a big ship around
Right.
like SARS.
You also spoke earlier about some of the challenges that you're facing at the moment in terms of fraudulence when it comes to VAT refunds, at the same time trying to broaden the tax base. Something that's also been highlighted in academic research when it comes to South Africa and those loopholes in tax collection is the behaviors of multinationals and profit shifting and base erosion. Are you beginning to close that loophole?
So that's a function of a few things. Firstly, whether we have competent people in areas of transfer pricing and some technical specialized areas. And we compete with Deloitte and PwC and all the other banks and firms for those skills. And we can't pay you as much as Deloitte does or as much as the banks do, so we are in the back of the queue to get those skills. But we have people who have a public service mindset, and so we're slowly recovering and restoring that. Secondly, it's the ability to detect instances of non-compliance. Let me give you one example. We have automatic exchange of information protocols with almost 100 jurisdictions that gives us records of South Africans who have financial assets abroad. When we get that, we then have to, and because we have that, we know that there's about 450 billion rand of financial assets offshore owned by South Africans. What we don't know is whether they were correctly disclosed and whether they are tax compliant. And so you need to work through that. Same with companies. Coming back to the point Dondo made earlier on, the minister indicated the quid pro quo for lowering the tax rate is to broaden the base and to address those instances of abuse. So we find all kinds of abuse, overstating services exchange between a parent company and a local subsidiary, which is nothing else than fraudulently getting money offshore. And that erodes our tax base. We find the abuse of assessed losses. If you have a growing contingently on any balance sheet of assessed losses, in the case of South Africa, what that means is potentially money that is due to the state that won't end up in the state coffers because someone will use it. Now, what has become in South Africa, I think globally, is assessed losses have become a tradable asset. People buy companies with no commercial intent other than to exploit a tax loss. That cannot be right. It was never the intent. So we have to address that. If you look at parent company loans, unproductive, and the only reason is to charge a particular interest rate and to get more money offshore. So there are all kinds of schemes and arrangements, and I think we're a long way from addressing that. But that's not our biggest problem. Our biggest problem at the moment in South Africa is probably leakage to the fiscus as a result of criminal and illicit economic activities. And sadly, during COVID, we have seen a significant proliferation of that. One example I've shared is the tobacco and cigarette industry, where just in the period of COVID, we had confiscated over 300 million sticks of tobacco to the value of 450 million rand. We had to deregister 3 clearing agencies, liquidated one, handed 8 cases over to criminal investigations, conducted 3,700 search and seizure operations, holding 385 containers and shipments in detention to the value of 3.5 billion. Collectively, all of that work has added another 5.8 billion of rand into the coffers of state. So the areas of abuse, unfortunately, is real and far-reaching, and I think we lose more money from criminal and illicit activities than from any other area of leakage.
Okay. So we've examined the capability or capacity of the state, or lack thereof, the challenges that exist. The Commissioner also mentioned that we always engage in endless and slow policy formulation. I would argue that it isn't even so much that, it's the lack of execution, even when we do come up with those very sophisticated policies. Tabi, one of the biggest challenges, we talk of the triple challenges of inequality and unemployment and poverty in South Africa. Unemployment, despite many substantial efforts, remains persistently stubborn. How and in what ways, and what are some of the low-hanging fruit that we can look at to stimulate job creation?
I think the first one is what Dondo mentioned on Spectrum. So I did a lot of work on Spectrum for the presidency, because I also sit on the Presidential Economic Advisory Council. So, if you look at Spectrum, South Africa was one of the first countries to commit to the International Telecommunications Union, based in Geneva, to move from analog to digital. And we've been trying to move since Minister Kasaburi, Ivy Kasaburi. So, I don't know how many ministers later, I think it's 13 or 14.
It's one
only
almost every
now,
year.
Yes, literally a new minister was appointed last year. And this last minister, Minister Kumbuzo, has done more in the past months since her appointment than any other minister since our commitment in, I think, 2004 or whatever. So, and what Spectrum does is that it reduces the price of broadband. It also, we get a quick broadband coverage. Firstly, we get quick broadband, and then we also get better broadband coverage in the country. It then, and part of the auction is that the operators will be asked to give free broadband in areas, in rural areas. So if you look at the unemployment numbers and you look at the discouraged workers, that number has been increasing. And I looked closer into the Western Cape. And the Western Cape, many people have said that they are discouraged to look for a job because the railway system doesn't work. And that's because rail is far cheaper than taxis. Now, if you have Spectrum, you don't have to travel anywhere to start a business. You don't have to travel anywhere to apply for a business. You can conduct your interview online. So, that automatically puts a lot of your money back in your pocket. The reason why South Africa's living wage is so high is because of exactly what everyone has been talking about in terms of failure in municipalities. So, many South Africans cannot afford private healthcare. But many who are part of the poor, and that's over 50% of South Africans, use private hospitals and use private schooling. And that's because of the state of public hospitals and public schooling. And so we've become, I almost say we're like our own governments, and especially the middle and the upper classes, that there's no reason, you don't need a minister of health because you dictate your health and where you want to go and how much you want to pay, depending on where you want to go. You are a minister of security. You depend, it's up to you to beef up your security in your home, or you have a driver, or etc. And you're seeing it increasingly with a lot of rich people. But going back
Just
to
follow up on that, though, Tabi. Stemil, I'd like to bring you in here because if we have such a situation when more and more people are opting out, what does it mean for the viability of our democracy then?
Well, what it means is that there are fewer and fewer shared spaces where we interact, and democracies are based on trust. And just, I think on Monday, the Edelman, the company, released their trust barometer, and South Africa is a country with very low levels of trust. And we share very few facilities, but also because, so it's 16.3% of South Africans have access to medical aids, and so therefore use the private healthcare system alone, solely. And so the people with social capital aren't going to Helen Joseph and then making the demands on the staff at Helen Joseph, etc., to make sure that that service and that the services they're offered are better. The same goes with public schooling. And so all of this checking out by those that can means that the levels of accountability that you acquire around to maintain, to put on that pressure, to sustain that effort, to make sure that those services are maintained decreases. But also, it means that what's the point of the democratic process? We saw, I mean, last year in the local government elections, 12 million people voted compared to just over 15 million in 2016. And understandably so, what's the point? So all of these things are eroding at the foundation of our democracy and actually of its sustainability. And that's why then the fantasy of having a Paul Kagame who can fix everything becomes so, has such currency, right, amongst part of our society because there's a sense that democracy is failing, because our democracy isn't being tied to administrative functioning to actual delivery.
All right.
Yeah, and so the other issue is that, and many people will say, no, a lot of what Dondo's work and department does is allocate state resources into the private sector.
Yeah.
So if you look at healthcare, a lot of it goes to private healthcare. It's because of this opting out that a lot of people have said, look, we can't use public healthcare, we're going to use private healthcare. So when Dondo looks at the needs of the healthcare sector, you then allocate these resources where people use them, and unfortunately it is in the private healthcare.
Right.
Similarly, with education, that more and more, and especially even poor people, are moving into lower cost private education, and often even illegal schooling, just to get better education versus what is offered in the public sector.
So you started us off, Tabby, in the conversation about how Spectrum is going to answer a lot of our challenges around unemployment. It's going to make a lot of things cheaper. To your point about if people don't have to travel, then they can do work online, right? But there are still people who still have to engage with the public transport, and it is not viable, it's prohibitive, it's expensive, and it's one of the things, in fact, which a lot of research is showing is increasing inequality in South Africa, or discouraging job seekers, because it's more expensive to try and go and look for work. You'd rather stay at home, and if you're lucky, perhaps get, the SRD grant of 350. Dondo, let's bring you in on these employment initiatives. In the budget last week, the taxing incentive was expanded through a 50% increase in the maximum monthly value of 1,500 Rand. Can you give us a sense, though, of how effective the ETI has been?
Look, the commissioner is better placed to give you the statistics and the details because they manage that. But, I mean, for us to even increase that and decide that we increase by 50% tells you that we're putting money where a maximum impact is. And Commissioner can talk to that. But let me pick up on the earlier points that, Tembile and Tabi are putting out. And let me try and put on my 1988 political activist student cap. Have we abandoned the democratic project as a country? Have we forgotten about the poor? And these are things that we should be asking ourselves in the state. What do we do? What are we doing about dysfunctional systems of government, including dysfunctional municipalities, where people don't care about the poor? What was the struggle for democracy? What was it about when we were going to the streets and marching? What was the mass democratic movement of 1989 was all about? It was about access. It was about changing the living conditions of people. Now it looks like, it seems that most of the people in the system have forgotten. We became, I don't wear a T-shirt anymore that was having a fist, but I wear a tie, and I forget about that. It's about service, and it's about changing what apartheid really demeaned many people as human beings. So we forgot that. And I think if the drive in a public servant who's serving, who's behind the desk at Home Affairs, or who's a DG in the treasury or DG somewhere in government has got that we're still in this project. We are still a young democracy. You know, we only a few years old. You know, we're not what it was. We're not, you know, old age democracies of Europe and the Americas. No. So I think those are for me the fundamentals and the basics that we seem to have forgotten. You know, whether it's a politician staying on the podium and making certain promises and performing their function, and whether it's a DG or it's about blue lights and, you know, someone closing and opening your door, or it's about me being DG, called DG, everything, walking around. That's why sometimes I don't want to be called a DG, I'm done. Because it is a title that is focused, and it is what Ed is talking about. People focusing on getting a clean audit vis-a-vis, and Deloitte, and happen to be in the Deloitte building. You know, but yes, clean audit is important, but what about service delivery? What about getting the basics right? Let this DG, you know, fold their sleeves and start digging and doing the work. So we have forgotten that. We have forgotten that, and it's about self-enrichment. It's about, you know, opulent lifestyles that we are accustomed to now, because but we forgot about the poor. So I thought, let me put that hat and say, let's remind ourselves. And these are the things that, if that's motivating you, and you're a politician, and that's motivating you and you're a public official, you'll clearly, your attitude towards your work is going to be different. And so I think, you know, these are not things that we're talking about openly nowadays, and, you know, but we have to. I always say to people that we have to remind our leaders, and I'm speaking now outside as a South African, our leaders who are in government, in public service, and politicians, that get off your high horse. Let's do what we have to do in ensuring that we create access for people, we create a conducive environment for the people's livelihoods to change. If that's not going to be the motivating factor, we can as well start calling South Africa a failing state, because the remnants of and things that defines and depicts a failing state or a country towards being a failing state are beginning to show, where we don't care about the poor and about improving the livelihoods.
In the face of what you then describe of these behaviors which have become cemented perhaps in the public sector to some extent, or within the political elite, and whether we care about the poor, one would argue that if indeed we did, we would do more and listen to the calls for a basic income grant.
Look, again, I would argue affordability. I would argue, fine, I'm the first person to say, if a basic income grant is going to come with some serious, we have to relook at the system. I'm saying, before we even talk about a basic income grant, and I know some people in the room and you know, watching us will say, yes, we need it. How much are we spending? What's that 59.4% that I was talking about? What's the composition of that? How much are we putting money in EPWP programs and community development workers? And now we've got these teacher assistants in hundreds and hundreds of thousands and billions of rands that we're spending in these programs. Let's look at the implication and the performance of those programs. It's one thing to get EPWP workers with yellow overalls, ripping big in EPWP, and they start work at 10, and by 12 o'clock they're done for the day. And there's no value, but the streets remain dirty. The streets, there's litter everywhere, and they are not performing what they should be performing. But if what's the drive, the inner drive, is a different one, then we can talk. Because sometimes the same people who should be accessing these grants fraudulently so, and we have to deal with that. So I think let's have a broader conversation.
All right.
What are we spending money, and can we afford it? I'll be the first one, if we can afford it, I'll be the first one to say, let's go for it and balance it out. That balancing act that's needed is going to have to happen again.
I'll come back to you now, Tabi. The Commissioner had indicated he wanted to respond to
No,
this point.
I think as South Africans, we clearly have to acknowledge that there's a need for some social support, whether you call it SRD, social grants, or anything else. The real question we have to ask is why? Why is that need there? And the answer to that is government has failed in delivering, one, an environment that is conducive to creating more productive capacity for businesses to thrive. And secondly, they have not created that environment to create jobs. The president said, government don't create jobs, business does. And that's true, but government provides the enabling environment. So we have had to compensate for the lack of giving people dignified, honest work. We've had to compensate by expanding our social support system. And that's the real debate that we have. How do we get there? In terms of leadership, I agree. You know, leaders should take their work seriously instead of taking themselves seriously. And we have too many leaders with a sense of self-importance, as opposed to knowing that they are here to serve. There's an interesting analogy that says, China works because of government, Singapore also. India works in spite of government. We are fast moving towards that end, where more and more things work in South Africa in spite of government, not because of government. And that's what you're saying. We're disintermediating the role government plays because of private security, private schooling, private healthcare, which should be a delivery by the state, isn't done so effectively. So until and unless we have those honest conversations, we will more and more lose the promise of our democracy and the promise that this government is incumbent on this government to deliver. And people will do what they need to do because survival is our most basic instinct.
All right, Tabi?
Yeah, I think the Commissioner said a lot of what I was going to say, but you know, in talking about social grants, in talking about the basic income grant, my question is, what are you solving for? Are you solving for, you know, because how is it that the working population, almost 50% of the working population, in using the broader definition, is unemployed? You know, how is it that the youth, they're not disabled, they don't have, you know, there's nothing wrong with them. So many of them are unemployed. So again, so the solution is a basic income grant, because that is not the solution that I would have if I was a South African president. The solution is job creation. The solution is growth, because growth is enables employment. And also when somebody's employed, they are in a better position financially than a recipient of a grant. You know, when the minister said 46% of South Africans are recipients of some sort of grant, that's a devastating statistic. Because these are not people who should be, a lot of them are not people who should be receiving grants. 18 million South Africans receive social grants. So the fact that 46%, almost 50% of South Africans receive some level of grant, and it's okay, and you want to pacify, you know, the problem with extending grants rather than actually solving for your inefficiencies, for lack of leadership, for lack of municipalities not working, because municipalities are enablers of growth. Right now we have, I think it's the 2-day conference, SALGA conference. Only 5% of municipalities are financially sound. 62% of municipal workers cannot use a computer. 65% of municipalities are financially dysfunctional, or not even financially, just dysfunctional. So these are, how do you expect growth to happen in that environment? And then what Stimbile said about, absenteeism. And then your solution, instead of dealing with all these problems, your solution is grants. I just think this is, that's really taking us down a very, very difficult, very dangerous path. And just lastly, we often talk about this, South Africa's fiscal policy is the most redistributive of all countries in the emerging markets. And many of these countries are bigger economies than ours. 15 million South Africans work. And of those 15, I'd say about 7 million South Africans contribute meaningfully towards taxes. So, the problems are in our faces, yet the solutions are not to actually tackle the problem, but to look elsewhere. Let's just find some money and actually give it to people who don't want to receive the 350, but would prefer jobs.
Yes, Tembele, I'll bring you in there. I would suggest how it's also perhaps a lot more complicated than that. I don't think that people don't want to receive the 350. They would prefer, certainly,
No, that's what I'm saying. They would
to be
prefer
productive. But
jobs.
in the desperate situation that South Africans found themselves under in 2020-21 during COVID pandemic, that 350 was a lifesaver. It kept people from going hungry. And I think we have to applaud the efforts where the National Treasury was able to deploy that very, very quickly to prevent people from suffering. There cannot be a silver bullet. These solutions must be pursued in tandem. There are people who are desperate who need the social support that government can give them without ignoring efforts at job creation or growing the economy. Certainly that needs to be prioritized. We know it has to be prioritized, but we simply haven't been able to get there. My question is, how do we do that?
So just a quick one.
Yeah.
It's not a, so we look at South Africa within the past 2 years and its problems.
Yeah.
These problems have been emerging and growing for years now.
Sure.
Poverty has been a problem for years.
Inequality,
It's just
unemployment.
inequality, unemployment, everything. It's just that COVID exposed it, not really, and exacerbated it somewhat. But the direction was the same. The trend, if you look at unemployment, the trend is the same. But the solutions is what I'm querying. So it's not that I'm not saying that we shouldn't support South Africans who are poor in the short term. Absolutely. But then don't say that actually now we have these numbers and it's so critical, we need to put all our resources towards social support, whereas actually we should have implemented the NDP a long time ago. And if we did, we wouldn't have found ourselves in dire situation as we did during COVID. And I'm also worried about this war, that if it actually becomes a bigger problem, it's actually, what helped us in the in 2008 and 9 in the financial crisis was that we were in a better fiscal position, and actually economically we were better, so we could actually, we built a buffer. Now we have zero buffers, we're exposed. So if the war is actually becomes bigger than what it is right now, and it's currently only in Europe, but if it becomes a world war, can you imagine what it's going to do with to a country like South Africa?
Absolutely. Lots to think about. Tembele.
Thanks. I think part of the reason why you don't see things getting any better in terms of addressing kind of the structural problems that the country has, and then more and more people are on social grants, is that we speak about social grants as if they're separate from the economy. The reality is that the person who gets that 350 rand, the gogo who gets that child grant, there's extensive research that's been done by Ingrid Bullard and others, that child grant goes back into the economy. And so what we partly have to think about is we need to think of, so we need to grow the economy, we need to expand entrepreneurship, get more and more people employed. But we also need to keep people from starving in the short term. South Africa has some of the highest rates of child stunting of similarly sized economies in the world. That's absurd. And so you've got that, the expert panel on the July unrest, made the point in their conclusions, in their recommendations, that this will happen again if we don't deal with the socioeconomic conditions that the majority of South Africans live in. And so you can't talk about economic growth, about employment, without factoring in what do you do while you're doing this to keep the society stable, to keep people fed. And lastly, when we talk about these economic interventions, transport for me is the biggest, my favorite fish and chip shop in Cape Town, Lusitania. Everyone must go. Last time I went there after the State of the Nation address, and the owner said they used to close at 8 o'clock. They now close at 6 p.m.
Security.
because the workers need to get home. And the train services, the Kailicha line doesn't function anymore. How was that even possible to happen? The engineers who are responsible for that, who are watching the train lines go, how does that happen? And so, we just need to have these conversations holistically.
Nikita, I want to talk about employment, just if you allow me.
Yes,
Because
please.
there's an elephant in the room. We don't only have an issue of unemployment, we have a problem of unemployability. We are producing, you see, what you measure is important. So we define social success measure, you're in trouble. We celebrate matric results as a success measure. And many of our matriculants cannot be absorbed into the economy. They have the wrong skills. We know with the fourth industrial revolution that countries in Asia are creating multiples of a job for every job lost. In other words, if you lose one job, they create 3, 4, 5, 10 jobs. We fail to create one job for every job lost. So not only do we have to create employment opportunities, we have to create an employment workforce that is relevant to the time in which we live, and we are not doing that.
Absolutely. Let's bring in some questions now from our participants online. Those questions coming through thick and fast. I'll try and read them and put them to our speakers and panelists this morning. First question, at what point will government accept the reality that the continued doling out of social benefits is increasing unaffordability and unsustainability? Couple this with social grant leakages into neighboring countries, and we have set the ground for a combustible future and social instability. That question from Deboho. Class. The second question for the Commissioner, we welcome the modernization project undertaken by SARS. Part of the appeal of the new custom legislation, as stated by SARS, were the efficiencies that would be brought by automating a lot of processes. The automation would enhance tax collection, but would also limit red tape and be trade facilitative to business. When is SARS implementing the Customs Duty and Customs Control Act of 2014? Those are just two questions coming from our participants. Dondo, I'll let you deal with the first one. I think we've already touched on it to some extent. Yes.
No, we touched the first one. I think it's and we were detailed about. But the reality is that that question has got lots of issues in it. It talks about the leakages into neighboring countries, and it talks about the porous borders. It talks about the ability to protect to protect the boundaries and the state. It talks also about, it brings a new question in. How do we view the number of illegal immigrants coming into the country, and how they access the grants? And anecdotal evidences that we can talk about the whole day, about how pregnant mothers cross over the border to give birth and access the grants and go back and so on and so on. So, but the reality is that the South Africa challenge is not only a South African challenge insofar as these issues are concerned. It's a regional challenge. It's a continental challenge. And it's intercontinental challenge because you've got a lot now of more Pakistanis and more illegal Eastern Europeans coming to the country, etc., etc. So over and above the challenge that we always had about illegal immigrants in South Africa. So when we address, I mean, you said I'm here 23 years. when we looked at the budget those years, I used to be a budget analyst for 3 provinces. And you remember, you look at the budget, you try and you're energetic, you had all the energy in the world and you think you're smart. And you look at a budget for Eastern Cape and KZN and Gauteng at the time, and you say, yes, with these numbers, with these estimates, they will be able to deal with their informal settlements by in the 15 years or 10 years from that time. Now, and 10 years later, it actually tripled in terms of, but when you go to, and I'm being honest, let's all take a bus ride and go to Deep Sloot, or Oliven, I live in Pretoria, Oliven Oudbosch in Centurion, or Spruit in Centurion. I can guarantee you, if you speak Zulu and Tswana, you won't be understood. And I'm not being xenophobic. That's the reality of our situation. Now, how do we view, and how does the world view the South Africa challenge as not only a South African challenge? Because the reality is that, yes, we talk unemployment, but all of us, 90% of the people in this room your gardener or your domestic or anyone who's helping your in the house is not South African. It's not. And when you go to a restaurant down the road, whether you're going to Spa or you're going to Spur, many of those are from either Zimbabwe or Mozambique. And we talk now, statistically and official statistics will suggest, yes, we've got a 50+% youth unemployment or even 75 youth unemployment in South Africa. But the reality is that we are not looking at South Africa as only a challenge. We have got challenges of illegal immigrants, how do our posture to them and how we engage with those countries in the neighboring is an issue. So the South Africa challenge is a bigger challenge than only dealing with your own. You go downtown Sunnyside in Pretoria, you go now in Durban, you go to Hillbrow, it's a different country completely. Let's deal with that. I'm not saying we must throw them out, but how then do we embrace them? How do we engage? And how do they bring them in the tax net? In townships, the 350 that Temple is talking about, that's spent in the townships and the grants goes to your Somali stores and spaza shops. I don't know if we've got all of them in the tax net in the way that we should. Are they paying taxes on the same resources that we're talking about? So the challenge is, the South Africa challenge is a bigger challenge than what it is. And we have to be open about it, and we don't have to be afraid of talking about this and being afraid that people will say we are xenophobic. How we engage with Zimbabwe, and we've started, at least in our case, we had a very uncomfortable conversation with Mthuli Mncube, the Minister of Finance of Zimbabwe, about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And we did that with the minister in the DRC the other day, last week. And we'll continue doing that, at least we're starting with the SADC ministers. And engage and say, how do we look at the challenge, the broader regional problem? Because that's where our challenge is. How do we cross the border in Mozambique and engage in Zimbabwe and engage with them and say, what is there that we need to do in your own country to actually make sure that you don't force your people to flee or to run into South Africa, because perceiving that there are more opportunities in South Africa. Because when they come here, health is our challenge, education is our challenge, access to social grants is our challenge, and because these children are born here. So all of these are a problem that when we are not, or if we are not addressing it, will be much bigger.
And the minister, Thulas Nxesi, has recently tabled legislation which seeks to some extent to tackle some of the issues that you're talking about as it pertains to employment and opportunities in the informal market for people who are here, perhaps illegally. Before, Commissioner, I get you to respond to the question that was put to you, we are running out of time. I don't want to let you go without having discussed Eskom, given how critical it is to our economy. If we are to grow, we obviously have to have enough energy for various industries to thrive. We remain in a very challenging position as far as Eskom is concerned. Firstly, what you're doing about stabilizing that debt. You touched on that last week in the budget. If you could tell us a bit more, and whether you are confident that Eskom is actually up to the task of dealing with its many complex crises.
It's a very sensitive issue, because the moment the treasury official or Minister of Finance says something about Eskom debt, the Eskom creditors get worried, and bondholders get also worried. But I mean, the comfort that we South Africans and everyone should know is that we are not just sitting back and not trying to find out ways of addressing, because we all know that the debt that's in there is about 400 billion or more, increasing, is something that we should be worrying about. But also there are obligations on that Eskom, that we must put on Eskom in terms of them as a company. They've got their board, they've got the financial responsibilities, they've well-paid executives. It's a company. It's a company. You cannot say there's Big Brother who's going to come with a big 400 billion rand check and sort you out. We expect, as the minister said, it's tough love. We expect them to also demonstrate willingness to be assisted. In Setswana, the saying, Mudimu utuza itusan. God will only help those who help themselves. So if Eskom has to demonstrate that they realize their challenges, there are certain things that they must do, including decreasing and in the cost structure, really getting rid of some of the assets that they have, and those are things that I think we'll need from Eskom. As we are fixing I think, look, the reality is that we have to come out in the public with real, when we have clearly sorted out the issues. What I, and you know very well, is that there's 120 or so billion rand out there, you know, in a form of green finance. And then the reality is that it is expected that it will address some of their challenges. Now, do you expect Eskom in its current state to take on 120 more billion? No. So it therefore means that we have to approach this very clearly. And the Minister of Finance was very clear that let's not attempt to address this Eskom problem only. Let's address the whole electricity challenge in its bigger, you know, in the bigger scheme of things. But you know, we cannot look the other way. It's too big to fail. We've been saying that to them, not too loud though, because then they would be comfortable. We cannot let Eskom collapse. We cannot let Eskom fail. It will be supported like we've committed. But we've got the 23 billion per year there that we announced a few years ago, 230 billion over 10 years. But we also cannot just sit back and not do the things that I'm talking about. So we'll expect more of them. And we will, the minister is committed, the Minister of Finance is committed to ensuring that we turn the challenge there that we have around. And we will do it. It's a matter of time. And when I think government is ready, we'll obviously have to give you timelines and timeframes. What is Eskom doing? They are unbundling. And again, in doing all of that, where does the debt lie is going to be an issue. Is this going to be a clean entity with no debt? And who's going to be taking? And what does it mean? And we all know rating agencies, by the way, have factored this debt in the balance sheet of the state anyway. So again, we'll approach this very carefully, and at the right time, you know, Nikki will let everyone know as to what the solution is. But we have intense conversations.
All right. Great. Commissioner?
Eskom clearly needs a competitor. Because even if we fix Eskom 100%, we'll still have an electricity problem. I think the question there goes back fundamentally to the implementation of the revised or the amended Customs Act of 2014. And I guess the questioner specifically wants to know the implementation of the amended registration, licensing, and accreditation provision. 2014 was also the year where SARS took a turn. Yeah. And so there was very little implementation. The modernization program completely stopped. The funding allocation dried up. And so there was just a period of paralysis. Time has gone beyond the 2014 Act. And the way we are conceptualizing our current customs modernization program embraces the requirements as required in the 2014 amendment, but it goes significantly beyond that. In terms of the registration, license, and control, a lot of work happening there. The AEO program, the Preferred Trader program, we've made significant progress. We've reinitiated the modernization, the technology platform, which is everything from exchange of information between neighboring countries, between institutions in government, the single window concept. The balancing act for SARS customs is, on the one hand, to enforce the customs law and ensure that the revenue is collected, but also to facilitate legitimate trade. And in finding that balance, it's almost impossible without modernizing our systems. We took Dondo and the minister to Beitbridge a few months ago just to help them see how we have fallen behind in creating just simple infrastructure to facilitate trade, and how we need to work better together as sister agencies within government. So it's a comprehensive program that we have submitted a business case to the Minister and to National Treasury, and we have recommenced that. And over the next few years, SARS also intends to bring in-house a lot more of its own IT development capability, because essentially, it's become a core competency for SARS to develop technology, and so we are building our capability. I say, jokingly, that SARS is actually a technology company dabbling in taxes. And so we have to have the core capability to build an administrative platform that is actually an ecosystem that allows us to engage with all of our stakeholders. And this aspect of the customs modernization program is one of the dimensions, and the questioner can be assured that it is receiving high priority, even at the level of the minister.
All right. We have run out of time, but I think it's important to take these last two questions because they're quite pertinent. I'm going to try and summarize this one because it's quite long. But question to Dondo about the implication or impact of Russia's invasion on South Africa from a South African government finance perspective and also consumer perspective. Perhaps if we could get a view from all the panelists on that one. And secondly, is there a plan of action to recover the billions of rands of state funds lost to state capture? How long will this process take, considering the backlog in administration we currently have? As you begin to respond to those questions, we'll do so in a way in which we make our concluding remarks as well, and where I would like you to also delve into, we've had this discussion now, we've had lots to reflect on and think about. As we look ahead, we've said we are a country long on promises, long on plans, and short on action. In your view, if you can incorporate your thoughts as to how we begin to implement all of these things that we've been talking about in terms of growing the economy, creating much needed jobs in ways which are going to create dignity for South Africans and we fulfill that democratic promise that we made. Stembile, I'll start with you.
Well, in answer to your final question, and my takeaway from here is we need to fix the administration.
Yeah.
We need a big focus on the Department of Public Service Administration, the Public Service Commission, and the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. We need to implement Chapter 13 of the National Development Plan. I wrote part of it, so please do read it. And we need to really take seriously fixing the administration of the country. And linked then to the issue on Ukraine, just from a international relations and a foreign policy perspective, we need to be prepared for the fact that South Africa won't be able to stay neutral forever. And if this conflict escalates to World War proportions, and I don't think that's a foregone conclusion. I think that many people who would be responsible for that escalation are trying very hard to make sure that it doesn't. But if it does, South Africa will need to pick a side, just because of where we are geographically. The Suez Canal is closed. You can only get around our border. We matter strategically. And so that's something that we need to factor into all of our decisions.
Okay, great.
So it's quickly on the Ukraine. Actually, we were invited yesterday. We're a member of the OECD Forum of Tax Administrators, and were asked what is our position because they're in a council meeting. And I obviously had to dodge that question very carefully. No, I wasn't neutral. I was very clear. I said, one, I'm not a politician. I'm an administrator. Two, it matters to us from a number of perspectives. One, with all of those countries, Russia and Ukraine, we have information exchange agreements. We have double tax treaties. So it's important for us to maintain productive, ongoing relationships with our counterparts with them, and we will do whatever we need to do that. That's what we do. Secondly, to the extent that it affects the economy, we will probably have swings and roundabouts. If oil prices go up, we'll benefit from that. South Africans will pay more for oil, tax revenue. So we don't really get into that because we, as I said, we impose the laws on the economy regardless of what is the trigger for that. On the last point, I think as an ordinary South African, we are moving far too slow. The issue of state capture is actually, we should be careful not to define it narrowly to a project. It is actually just a symptom of the state of our society. Fractured, corrupt, lawless, the riots of last year, all of these things, the evasion, the criminal. So we can't address this transactionally, we have to fix it at the core.
Yeah.
Our little role is to do with these projects. This year that have passed, we have finalized 650 cases of syndicated crime. We've collected 6.5 billion of additional revenue. We have frozen certain assets between major players in the state capture project. Much of that is now in the hands of the NPA for further prosecution. So there's a lot happening there. We don't do our work in public, but you would have heard just last month we announced that we had arrested on the failed esteemed dairy project. We've arrested the company director as well as a Gupta associate. We can't say more than that. But there's a lot happening. It's happening too slow. But at the same time, as addressing that, we need to stand back and say, how do we create a society that is socially more cohesive, where people are voluntarily compliant, and where law and order works, and the state, who is supposed to ensure that we are not corrupt, doesn't become a major catalyst and a perpetrator of corruption itself. We have a lot of work, and I think that we have run out of time.
Okay, great. Tim?
So, listening to the commissioner, from a personal perspective, SARS works very well, and I always wonder how do other people manage to escape the wrath of SARS? Try buying art pieces out of South Africa. Try buying a product that has. I bought a serum and Port Health. I didn't even know that we had Port Health. Sent me a message on my phone. I got an art piece from a Ghanaian artist, and SARS just attacked me like I was importing drugs. I don't know how many forms I had to fill in, and then I overpaid taxes, so they had to pay me back. But it really works efficiently when you're not a criminal. Just a few things, and I will talk about Ukraine. So on stunting, I was appointed by Minister Nene to look at the zero rating project after the VAT was increased, and which links up to corruption. South Africa has one of the most comprehensive school feeding programs. But when we looked at actually what food was being served versus what food was procured in terms of those who applied for the tender, you'd see a sandwich that has, protein and cheese, but at the back of the sandwich, there's nothing. But those are the things that, as much as we have this comprehensive feeding scheme, we also have this corruption that results in stunting. So when you look at the comprehensive feeding schemes versus equivalent countries, peers, and yet you look at stunting, it doesn't make sense, and that's because of our own doing. And the 350, in the past 2 years, retail stocks, telecommunication stocks, mining is a different story because it's exogenous, have increased more than ever. If you are in those stocks, and I advise you to stay, you'll be, very wealthy. And that's because that 350, exactly what Dondo is saying, doesn't only go to let's say, non-South African shop owners, but it also goes to capital, the very capital that many people don't like. So I've decided, instead of also fighting this 350, I'm going to buy Pick n Pay stocks. Because last year, Pick n Pay, because it was doing so well, announced that it's going to open 200 boxes in rural areas. They didn't do that because, there's no need to. It's very opportunistic because they know that money it has to go somewhere, and there's a target market for it. So I'm also looking at wealth creation,
Well
and
done.
I know you'll be tracking me because all of a sudden I'll go from naught to
We have a high wealth unit just around
to
the corner.
45%. But on Ukraine, and I think this is very critical for all of us, this year globally we've been talking about inflation, that inflation is picking up. We're seeing inflation in developed markets picking up quicker than in emerging markets. Part of the reason why we're seeing inflation in developed markets increase, they're not so much about, it's not consumption driven, which is typically what drives inflation, but it actually supply chain disruptions that are causing re-rating of products. And so you're seeing these, as a result of these delays, a lot of these prices are being re-rated and are becoming a lot more expensive, and the pass-through is going into inflation. So in South Africa is, fuel and food. So we're seeing oil prices go above $100 a barrel for the first time since 2014, I think it is. We are also seeing, obviously, food prices as a result. The reason why we didn't see inflation, because a lot of companies took that inflation, it didn't pass it through to consumers, because consumers were in a pickle, which we still are. And so now companies can't continue to take on that inflation, and we're seeing them passing through into food prices. So this is the product of what is going on now. Can you imagine if it goes into a fully fledged global war? It's going to have huge currency ramifications, which is more inflation. We're going to see interest rates rise as a result of taming that inflation. And we also import around just less than 30% of our wheat from Ukraine. And in my understanding, something like, you contract into the forward market. So now you have to scramble for another market at another pricing that is typically unfavorable because of the timing. And so that's also going to impact on the cost of wheat versus, let's say, the cost of wheat that we received from the Ukraine. But they're multiple. I mean, Europe is our big trading partner. Europe is increasingly being dragged into this war as well. And again, I think, importantly, it's been said by Stembile that we need to have a stance. We can't be neutral in the case of adversity. I think neutrality is complicity, and in this case, we're actually siding with the instigator, and we need to side. History must judge us in a more, I guess, better light than if we keep quiet.
All right. DG 23.
Thank you very much.
I only tease you about that,
Yes.
Dondo, because I think it's such an extraordinary tenure of service to the people of the Republic.
Yes,
So it really
yes.
that's a huge accomplishment.
And I was going to start there. I was going to say, it's important. I used to, even at high school and even at university, I was not a fast runner, but I made sure that I'm in this team, and in our house in high school had great runners who would do the relay for the school. And I used to take that baton at the end, because the other three guys would run, and I would automatically be a winner. So, but it's important to give someone a baton to run with things. And we've seen that with Maria, with Lungisa, and Lesetja Lungisa and myself. And obviously it's important that someone comes in, whether internal or external, but also important to partner and to get knowledge. It's not easy. The work that we do is complicated. It's not easy. You need to be patient. But also we need skills. We need to continuously upgrade the skills. And so it's important. And many of you in the room and many of you watching are better placed to come in. I always say to people, especially when I'm giving the last few words to say in any, I say, guys, come in, come and join us, come help us. I've been saying that to Tabi for almost 5-7 years now. I said, but she's coming, and she's really come to the party in many ways. She's assisted. But it's important, come to the crawl, come and help, because this is a young democracy that we're all building. And we'll make mistakes. We've made mistakes, and now we need important skills. And the key skill now is project finance, is infrastructure, it's but the private sector, as I demonstrated earlier on, people who made Senten to be what it is in the last 20 years should come in and create those public spaces and infrastructure, much needed infrastructure. So yeah, the idea of this baton is important, and someone must be given that very soon. So the other important thing is as we discussed now, is Ukraine. It is worrying. I mean, in the budget, the structure of the budget, if you know now, and the structure of the budget review is such that we'll try and attempt to give, how the global economy is perceived, and what is in the assumptions that our forecast team would put in, and the risks. Will identify a couple of things, and even the minister in his speech will put certain assumptions out there. Now, with Ukraine, all of that is out of the window now. And we have to relook at the price of oil, exceeding 104 rand to, Brent crude price oil, tighter financial market conditions now. What will that mean in terms of the amounts that we have to borrow? What does this mean for global financial flows, etc.? It's going to have an impact. So what's happening there is very worrying, and obviously previous speakers have mentioned this, and it's important that we cannot look the other way, and we have to, an important and quick solution is necessary, not only for Europe, but for the world over. And also for various, we are in BRICS. Think about it, we are in BRICS, and we've got Russia in the room, and it's important that the sooner that conflict is addressed, we are able to really openly engage as we've been engaging. But you can imagine if there's this elephant in the room, how do we really continue talking and engaging? So again, a solution is important. A solution must be quick, and we cannot wait any longer between what's happening there. And finally, my final thoughts on the issues. I think Stembile is right. She sums it up by saying we have to fix the administration. We have to fix the municipalities and fix ourselves, and national and provincial. That's one area. But we also have to fix the mindset of everyone who's in the Republic currently, both illegal and legal South Africans, illegal immigrants and legal ones, including South Africans. And in the point that I made earlier, because I think that's the biggest risk facing us currently, if we don't fix that, because majority of our townships are slums. They were better off, now they are slums. Informal settlements have spiraled out of control everywhere, and illegal occupation of land is like everywhere now. It's like free for all. The remnants and the signs of a failing state are showing all over. And I'm saying this, I'm looking around what's happening, what happened in Africa, in many countries that were damaged by war, in civil wars in many parts of the. And when I speak to some of my counterparts everywhere in countries like Sierra Leone, countries like Liberia, where we all know the history of those particular two countries in particular, because I showed great interest in the last couple of years, and the signs that are there that demonstrate what a failing state can be like. We're seeing some of those here now, and we have to harness and make sure that we pull back quickly in order to stop what essentially may be a damage. So I think fixing the administration is entirety is going to be quite critical moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stembile Mbete, Commissioner Edward Kieswetter, Dr. Tabi Liyoga, and the DG, Dondo Mokhodjane. Thank you so much for your insights, a very lively and informative discussion. We appreciate your time this morning and helping us unpack what are truly complex issues, and there are no easy solutions. Yes, there's impatience for answers and to restore the dignity of our people so that we do not become a failed state. So let us charge forward then, hopefully informed with better ideas of how to go out there and do just that. Thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate it. That's it from me, just to hand over back to Rueda to make the concluding remarks.
Thank you. I know that we have run out of time, so I will keep the closing remarks and a few thank yous very, very short. Firstly, a huge thank you to our guests and panel members for your attendance and participation this morning. Director General of the National Treasury, Mr. Dondo Mokhodjane, Commissioner of South African Revenue Services, Mr. Edward Kieswetter, our esteemed panelists, Dr. Stembile Mbete and Dr. Tabi Liyoga, and our panel moderator, Nikiwe Bikicha. Thank you very much. Thank you also to our valued clients, leaders of South African business, members of the media, Deloitte staff in attendance, and of course, all of our virtual guests. We talked a lot about the challenges that we face as a country. We ended with some sobering thoughts around Russia and Ukraine. But if there's one thing that South Africans are known for, it is our resilience. And in his closing remarks, the Minister paid tribute to the millions of South Africans who demonstrated resilience and courage during the times of pandemic and economic hardship. The resilience of our nation is an attribute that we have become known for, dare I say, the world over. And it is the same resilience that we must continue to draw upon as we, both business and government, look to the future. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us at Deloitte this morning, and have a prosperous day further. Good morning. Thank you.
without you know the time are you still dizzy? Since I come along, well my body's been a mess, and I miss your ginger hair and the way you like to dress. Won't you come on over? Still making a fool out of me. Why don't you come on over, Valerie? Well, sometimes I go out by myself and I look across the water, and I think of all the things and what you're doing. In my head I'll bring a picture. Since I've come home, well my body's been a mess, and I miss your ginger hair and the way you like to dress. Won't you come on over? Stop making a fool out of me.